Okay, here we go.
Okay.
You're good?
I'm good.
Welcome to episode 13 of Living Your Life with Agnes Laing, the podcast brought to you by Extension Marketing. And for more information, you can head to extensionmarketing.com. This is going to be an interesting one today. I have no idea how this is going to go. My mom, Agnes Laing, is joining us this morning.
Hello, my delightful daughter.
All right, we already know she never calls me delightful, so this is going to be very interesting. I thought it would be interesting to have you on as a guest, and we're not going to go with the complicated kind of background because we're going to wait on that one for another podcast of your background, escaping Hungary during the Hungarian Revolution, making your way to Canada. We're going to kind of start at the beginning of adulthood.
Perfect.
Does that sound good?
That. Yes,
okay. Because I think it's going to reflect well with what this podcast is about and my admiration for the type of business you have built around health and sport and kids. So my mom is the founder and creator of the Nepean Corona School of Gymnastics. It is one of the largest gymnastics facilities in the country. It has produced some amazing athletes. And my mom has been at the helm of this right from day one. How you were young?
I was 22. Can you imagine? I was 22 and I had this vision. I had this vision as a teenager that if I couldn't make it as an elite athlete, I still want to stay with sport, health, wellness. And so in my mind, I thought I was going to create a sport environment where I can help other athletes achieve what I basically physically wasn't good enough to do.
You weren't a fantastic gymnast. You were a dancer prior to even being a gymnast, and you were training extensively as a ballet dancer.
I trained 5 days a week, 3 hours of classical ballet, which was way too much at the time. They didn't have Pilates and all the wonderful things that help keep an athlete, a dancer, healthy. So I started to hurt at a very young age, and I went into gymnastics. Lo and behold, that was just as difficult, as you know.
Yes.
And so I went into gymnastics, I was 12, and really that is past that age where you can really have great success. But I knew I was going to stay with it.
And it's interesting because you can have coaches who have never been great at the sport but are fantastic coaches, and then you can have coaches who have been athletes, elite athletes of that sport, and then turn out to not very good coaches at all. So you had a passion for the sport, but there was much to learn. And we'll go with that because you started off very small.
I started off with 40 kids. It was this dream, and I thought 40 is better than none. And I went to a couple of high schools in the city. There was no such a thing as a permanent facility. I went to the school board and I said, I would like to start an organization, and can I rent your gyms every day after school? So those first couple of years, we would take out the equipment at 4:30, get all the parents and the kids to help, train for 3 hours, pack up the equipment, start all over again the next day.
Okay, were you getting this equipment from? I mean, when you look at gymnastics, there's 4 events for women, 6 for men, you know, and...
Well, we had women only to begin with, and I used the school equipment. And as everybody called it, my expensive hobby, because although I worked full-time and I gave all of it, I didn't make any money. So it was really a passion. Your late dad would call it my expensive hobby. Really, as 45 years later, it turned into a wonderful career that provides jobs for 65 people.
Yeah, if you imagine this, one dream, 40 athletes with parents coming in to help set out the equipment, to now one of the biggest facilities in the country and full-time employees. How many full-time staff?
We have 14.
14 full-time staff.
And we have about 50 part-time.
Okay, so you can imagine the magnitude. So I've grown up. I have literally grown up in this gym. I was born in 75. You started the club in 72. And so what was the shift in realizing that you were going to need to move out of a high school gym and to be able to find a facility? Because at this point, there's growth and there's interest.
Growth. So by 1979, I went from 40 kids to probably 400 kids. And because there were nothing in Ottawa had occurred of that kind of a facility, I seeked out other places, and I copied what was available in Toronto. And I came back to Ottawa, and I had to find a landlord who was willing to invest in this concept. Nobody ever heard of a warehouse turning into a permanent gymnastic facility. So that took a year of persuasion. And once we got the facility, we were rolling, and our membership increased. I needed full-time staff because now we were running programs during the day. And then the dream of producing higher level athlete was a reality. And you came along and you were part of that whole growth, because I would bring you to the gym and coach an athlete, feed you, coach an athlete, come back. So by the time you were 5, you were throwing cartwheels. You just thought that was a way of life.
Yeah, I just thought that was normal. People always ask me now, and I go, I honestly grew up doing this. So it's second nature to me. It's like walking sometimes when I can just go and do a flip still.
So, Leanne, what became difficult for me is I saw that you had some talent. And then I had to think, I'm a coach, I'm a mother, and my daughter shows an interest. And how is that going to work? So the mother-daughter relationship became part of my whole coaching career.
It did. And before I started to grow into this, you had athletes who were reaching a high level. Where were you getting your training from? Were you learning on the fly because this wasn't something that you had trained at or had been around that elite environment?
Very good question. Canada wasn't producing high-level coaching courses. It was unheard of. So you had to do a lot of work on your own. I chose to go to the United States, and I went to some of the best gyms, and I would sit for a week at a time and take notes. And I went back to school, and I did some biomechanic courses while I was pregnant with you. I had to do everything to advance myself because the country wasn't ready to produce coaches. Many years later, they got much better, and Canada found ways to train Canadians. But part of the original group of coaches, and I'm one of them, is we had to self-initiate. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did. I spent time in other gyms, I read books, I watched as many TV programs as I could.
I remember once we even took a trip out to the ranch. You even went to study under Bela Karolyi.
I did. Well, I actually spent a number of weeks not at the ranch. I went to the ranch with an athlete. Mm-hmm. But I did go to his school in Houston, and that was probably a real turning point for me to spend time and see how these two incredibly dedicated husband and wife were producing athletes. And I learned a lot from them. In spite of what is going on today, they were great role models for me into the type of commitment one has to do to keep the sport, to keep yourself up with the sport.
I want to just generalize
Sure.
this a little bit, because you talk about the coaching and you talk about how Canada had to shift from it needed to advance and to coach the coaches. There needed to be a system in place. Do you find that has been essential for every sport? That the coaching certifications, what they're learning, has to be effective in every sports organization.
It is. They did it well with the National Coaching Certification Program. I think other sports have done exceptionally well. Figure skating, swimming, diving, skiing were showing great success. I don't think we have done enough in the gymnastics area. So I would like to, for the next generation, I would like a greater investment in actually a degree program like they have in Europe and in the sport of gymnastics. It's very popular, but there aren't enough coaches.
Now, you talked about it as being this expensive hobby, mm-hmm. but then socially, I don't know if there's a different social outlook on a coach now, 45 years later, or how people saw you 45 years ago that you're a coach, right? Unless you're now making, working for an NHL franchise or coaching professionally, you're like, okay, you're in,
you're a real coach.
Good, yeah, you're a real coach. What is the perspective from people, or what did you have to deal with when you would say you're a coach, compared to the person next to you saying I'm a dentist?
Absolutely. Good. And a great question. Really, I think people thought that I was, it was a hobby. I somehow like to flip, even though, of course, you stop flipping by the time you're coaching because it's not a sport you do into your 30s. And they looked at it as something like fitness. there was no understanding that really I am directly involved in the well-being of a child. I have to keep them healthy. I have to have a tremendous amount of knowledge, both biomechanics, there's a lot of psychology in developing an athlete. So when I would go away for a competition, my friends thought I was going away for a weekend of fun. Toronto, they couldn't understand why I would go to Sudbury or Hamilton or Sault Ste. Marie. It was, have a nice weekend. And as the years went by and my friends took some more initiative in learning about what's happened to Corona and the success of my children, they perked up and realized coaching is a very serious job and a very complex job. And it affects family life because you are out at the same time as the child is, and you might have another child at home, a husband at home. So a coach gives up a lot of their personal time to be away from their own family. It's not normal working hours.
Right. It isn't a 9 to 5. And oftentimes, like, you could take a swimmer's schedule. You know, they're up early and at the pool, and then they're back at it in the afternoon. Or you've got hockey coaches that are playing, you know, like game times are late at night. Like, you have to have the mindset.
And your family
has to have the understanding.
You have to have support. Now when I hire young coaches and I initiate them into what it is to be a career coach, I say the first and foremost is that if you're married, your spouse has to be on board. If you're single, you have to know that you will not be out every evening like your friends. Your social life changes. And that's really big to do for an entire life. And I've done it. So I have great empathy for those coming on board to guide them and to make sure that they have some time off.
And you've seen this from so many different perspectives because you've done the majority of the career was as a coach. And producing athletes. And while you were doing that, the business side of things was building, you know, so it went from like 90% coaching, 10% business, then 80-20, 70-30, you know, and I as I was growing up, I could see the growth and the shift. But there were a number of years, and let's hit on this, where you were coaching a number of kind of top prospects and really good kids, of which I was one of them.
Then it became a much more of an emotional journey for me. Other kids who have a wonderful workout can go home to their parents and say, "Hi, Mom, hi, Dad, I had a great workout," and that's it. And they could also go home and say, "I didn't have a good workout, but I don't want to talk about it." You, unfortunately, didn't have that opportunity. And I realized early on in your athletic development that there was a very fragile balance, that I had to give you space to be able to get in the car and just know that you had a bad practice and I not question you. And that didn't come easy. Sometimes I failed, and sometimes I was good at it. And as many athletes work with sports psychologists, we brought in a sports psychologist to work with your group and you and all the other athletes. And I remember a sports psychologist making little notes and putting them underneath mats throughout the gym. And it would say, "Remember, Agnes, you have one daughter, but many gymnasts." Mm-hmm. And that stayed with me for life.
You're talking about it, and I have actually openly talked about the work that we did with Terry Orlick, who was the sports psychologist that we worked with. And I have talked, we haven't done it in a podcast version, but I have spoken about the intense fear that I had of going backwards, which put a massive strain on my career, on our relationship for the time, because I was around 11, 12 years old, and we both knew that I had the ability at that point to really maybe go the high performance route, where there could have been there could have been a lot of opportunity. I was doing incredibly well by that age, and then in the middle of my last competition, like my provincial championships, I was about to win my second title, and I stopped going backwards in the middle of my last pass.
I remember that.
And I'm like, I was about to capture. I had to just finish the routine, and I was gonna win. And I stopped going backwards midway through the last tumbling line, and that launched into a two-year massive internal battle, of which I now, looking at it from the outside, think that it was probably the biggest propeller of my personality and how I achieved things based on how I got through
Adversity.
those 2 years, because we thought that it was maybe just a little blip, that I just had a mental block, and that I was going to be able to work through it. There was, I think, incredibly frustrated with this athlete who all of a sudden was not doing anything I was supposed to, but also the fear because I was going to injure myself. Absolutely. I was stopping going backwards, the momentum of going backwards in midair, and I was coming down crashing.
It was, first of all, terrible to see as your mother.
Yeah.
And then profoundly complex as a coach, because we know this happens, and it happens in every gym every year, that you suddenly have an athlete that for whatever reason, it's called fear, and fear can be unrealistic or just, there's no sense to it. It was you who had it. Mm-hmm. And so I had to, as your mother first, it became overwhelmingly complex for me to make sure that this doesn't turn into a lifetime struggle about issues for you. Mm-hmm. So I had to protect your mental health. And then I was challenged by the fact that I knew you were talented. I had to figure out whether you really loved being there.
Or if I was there because my mom was the head coach, exactly. and that's where I went after school.
And you didn't have an out. Mm-hmm. So I remember telling you every day, you have an option. Mm-hmm. You can get into dance, you can do anything you want, and I'll find a way to get you there. Because remember, I was coaching every day. I didn't have the freedom to drive you to activities. But I said to you, Leanne, but you insisted.
Well, I took a break. I remember I took about a 2-3 month break, and I hated it. I couldn't stand coming home from school and doing nothing. I just didn't want to be one of those kids. And I can't even imagine it now with electronics and phones and social. Like, I can't even fathom what would be going on with kids who don't have that activity. But I knew I needed to do something, and I knew deep down that I wanted to be good at it. So, we started to work with Terry Orlick, and I literally went back to starting from scratch.
That was the process. Is we learn as coaches, where do we have to go to allow this athlete to work with the fear and not waste a 2-3 year period. So the what is out there in this sport is that you go back to basics, and you allow the athlete to literally relearn, and to allow them to know that they can still have success with the fear. Mm-hmm. And then the coach has to be creative, and you work around the skill as much as you can. So you were a remarkable back tumbler, but we had to teach you to do front tumbling as well, in case you never tumble backwards. And that took us 2 years. And I know till the day you retired, mm-hmm. you had that.
I had the fear.
But you learned.
Yes.
You learned to compartmentalize that and say, I am afraid, but I'm capable of doing it.
Yeah. I still to this day have dreams of me not going backwards. Like, it never went away. But I had the visualization tools that I learned through Terry and studying and having to learn. I remember going to bed at 13, 14 years of age and having to do visualization to go to sleep. And I had to accomplish 20 successful back passes in my head. Yeah. And even in my head, and I don't think people understand this, even in my head I would have the fear and would stop even as I was visualizing. And so I would have, if I got to 15 and then balked, or then I had to start back at 1 so that I could successfully, it was exhausting, even just going to bed trying to get through the visualization. But it was that I still had to do. Yeah, on my last pass as an NCAA athlete, I was able to do the visualization quickly. Like, I went from sometimes having to stand there for a long time when I was first learning how to do this to I could do it in a split second. But there was never, not one day or not one backwards movement where I didn't have to trigger that visualization.
But that's the success that you had.
Yes.
Because, today
and it doesn't
sport,
happen
everybody's visualizing.
Right. But that was a long time ago.
We were in the forefront of doing it. Really, only Olympic athletes had that exposure. But we were lucky. We began it as a club early on. We had all our athletes visualize, and for you, it was the most effective tool, as you say. Now, do you have that today? If you have something that is a challenge. Do you sort of visualize it?
Yeah, and I've talked about how making the decision to leave my 20-year career and, the fear that I had of oh my God, what am I doing? And going through, what am I going to be doing? And I would sometimes visualize myself kind of, broke with nothing. Like, I would go through really bad, that's scary. I know that, but in those nights where I was pacing my house, kind of saying, am I making the right decision? Am I not? Like, I would sit on my couch in the middle of the night and visualize the success that I was going to be having. I would visualize things that I was going to achieve. I would visualize how I was going to get there. I would visualize the steps that I needed to take. And so I found that it has completely launched the way that I deal with learning and adversity and getting from one aspect of my life to another. I think visualization was critical in all this. It was
creative thinking, because you're always a step ahead.
I like to think so.
Yes.
But I do know that it was very difficult for us because you had to push me, you had to stay back. And I want to let people know, like, Dad, it was you guys were divorced. So it was, and back then it was not 50-50 like it is today. Like, you were the primary caregiver. I had a great relationship with Dad.
Absolutely.
And very involved in our lives, but it wasn't that Dad was also there, for the drive homes, and
there was no balance.
There was really, if I'm trying to say that, right, it was full-time mother, full-time coach with, a little bit of baggage. Like, it was complicated, and I had to explain to people because it's a dynamic, very hard, difficult to explain.
Well, first of all, coach-athlete dynamic is a unique one, and then on top of that you put mother, and I think on top of that you put primary parent.
Yeah.
And a brother who
we should mention was also training.
Also a gymnast. So our house functioned like a well-oiled machine. School, gym, homework, dinner, bedtime.
Mm-hmm.
It's a unique discipline, and that I'm grateful for, that you were both exposed. It made you strong, healthy, productive adults. On the other hand, there are parents who would criticize what we did and say, where is play? Where is playing outdoors? Where is doing 5 or 6 sports? It's a decision families make, and the kids this is what they want to do. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
It's happening, though, in every sport now, Mom. Like, so I think back then, yes, the kids were doing a lot more variety. It seems now, with hockey, with any sport, parents and families are making the commitment early on that they're going to be focused on this. As a coach, do you agree with it? Do you think kids need to be exposed to more? How do you see it?
We should tell your wonderful viewers that this is a Sunday night family discussion, often when we're together, because my wonderful son-in-law, who I love very much, Tony was an elite athlete, but he did multiple sports. Mm-hmm. And so when he sees what Jamie, my granddaughter, your daughter, Tony's daughter, is involved, and now she's the 3rd generation gymnast, and the time commitment she's doing as a 10-year-old, which is a repeat of what you did. And although he's proud of it and supports it, he questions it. And I think it's great that he questions it.
This podcast is brought to you by Extension Marketing. They are a new breed of marketing agency that acts as your virtual marketing department, designing and implementing cost-effective marketing strategies that will grow your business. I can speak to this personally, as I've been using the Extension Marketing team to help me launch and grow my business. Founder Pat Whalen has been a lifesaver for me, a genuine coach guiding me along the way into uncharted territory. Tell them you're a friend of the show and receive a free 1-hour consultation. Check them out at extensionmarketing.com.
My answer to this complex question is that if the child, always go back to the child, if the child shows potential and loves it, they have the ability to be a high-level athlete, there's no other way today, because sport has grown to be a very scientific experience from a coaching point of view. For them to be good, they need to put more time in. if they're a great athlete, but the athlete is not for high-level accomplishment, put them in as many sports. And don't do anything past 12 or 16 hours a week. But I think today, if an athlete wants to reach a high level, they have to commit at a younger age.
What do you think about, we're learning now that there's hockey players, that are playing at the NHL level who can't throw a ball. It's...
The coach missed out in a well-rounded development. I think that's essential, that they be well coordinated throughout their body, hand-eye coordination, everything. Fit, flexible, aerobically, at the top of their game, whatever sport they're doing. No, it shouldn't be to such exclusion. I promote my granddaughter to ski, to swim, to do other things. I bought her an airwalk to go and play outside. Did I call it right? What is it?
That you got Julia?
You got...
oh, no, that was our Hanukkah present, Mom. That was right. We're taking full on.
But I promote them to go out, and I'm always asking who wants to come skiing with me.
Yeah.
So it's a question that can't be answered in one of our podcasts. There is much research for both ends. Mm-hmm. But I don't believe at the exclusion of a well-developed body.
So you have had 45 of training athletes. How have you, over the years, distinguished between when it's a parent pushing or when it's a child?
In about 5 minutes.
That you can tell the difference whether
why is the child there?
Yeah.
That's something you really do get with experience. If I look back at 22, every little kid that came in the door was committed and was good. And now I look back and I realize it was probably every 10th kid that was there because they want to be there. You learn that early. Once again, not at that fun level, not at the child who comes 2-3 times a week, but the athlete that's there, as we were discussing, 4 or 5 times a week at a young age. I can tell pretty quickly. And it's not necessarily bad that the parent wants them there, but it's not right if it's not the child who's one step ahead.
And how can you tell when it's the child that is gung-ho? Like, what is that dream kind of kid coming in who has a work ethic or who really is happy to be there?
Great question. I believe that few children have full intrinsic motivation. I think they need help. That's the rare child who is so self-driven that they don't need any guidance. So that's the dream child. And in a coach's career, maybe you'll get 1 or 2. That has the whole package. I think what makes a great coach is to take the child that has some vision and instill in them a love for learning, for pushing their body. So what I look for in a child that I feel can be mentored to be that, a twinkle in the eye, always willing to try something. They come in and there is joy instead of, oh my God, I've got another practice. It's a child who watches and observes what else is going on in the gym. It's a child who looks at you and you can see in their eye that they're taking in what you've attempted to teach them. And it's a child who doesn't get down on themselves too quickly. So we look for those attributes, and then if we see a child who's clock watching, who's looking to see if their parent is watching, who gets at every opportunity to sit down, at every opportunity to do something other than what they're being taught, you sort of say, okay, how much of their time here are they really enjoying? Let me just
No, yeah, for sure. Because then you take them to a competition, and then you might find that the kid who loves being there and loves everything about it can't compete. And then you realize the kid who is making their way through training and doing whatever they can, they shine. They love the competition, right? So hence more psychology. And it can be like that for any sport. You could have a kid who kind of gets through, practice, hockey practice. They sail on through. But as soon as they're on that competition stage, they put on they're a different level. I think about the psychology or how or what child is going to make it. Like, there's so many layers.
You know, Leanne, you know the sport and you're an athlete because you're asking these questions because I think
and I'm not,
both.
And I'm not just asking it from a gymnast, from this, because it applies to so many sports and how kids or athletes train and compete.
Well, that's another level of psychology. You're right. The child who trains incredibly well and can compete, and they're a gifted athlete. That athlete needs very specific mental preparation. And at that point, all you can do for them at a competition is be support and take that athlete and spend equal amount of time in their mental preparation with a sports psychologist, with their parent, to help them, because there's nothing worse than being a good athlete and not being able to
showcase it.
To showcase it at the right moment. What's more difficult is the athlete who is relatively lazy, unmotivated, gifted, and goes to a competition and just pulls it off. Because then you say, how do you come back and ask that child to work harder when they just won? But what happens, there's a dead end to that. You can only do that for so long, and then you get to the next level where it's impossible to do. And then those athletes have a big hurdle. Either they stay with the sport or they leave, and that's sort of the fall-off point in for instance, in gymnastics when that happens. You were a little bit of both.
I was a little bit of both, yes. Yeah, that's right. There were times when I could turn it up, and
there were times when I couldn't motivate you in the gym, and that's when, go back to mother-daughter, that's when the mother-daughter relationship became complicated, because I couldn't call your mother to say, by the way, your child isn't working hard, because I was your mother. So that's when we had to make these deals that we do not talk about gymnastics when we got home, because you needed the right to have time off. So if you remember that, and then
well, I do, and then I remember how I competed, and how certain times I could really turn it on and pull off something that I hadn't quite trained properly,
and my eyes would be closed.
Yeah, and you didn't deal well with me compete. Like, you as a coach and mother, like, I'm experiencing this now with Jamie. So Jamie's 10 and just came back from her provincial championships. We had she did really well, but I was
a wreck.
Like, I was a nervous wreck. I was sweating, and maybe it's because I could feel, I understood exactly what she was going through. Right. Although I think it might have been easier as an athlete to stare at the beam rather than the parent. But, like, I know. I actually sat behind you because I just needed my space. And then and she's not doing the tricks that I was, where there's a danger level yet or a real good chance of falling, right? Like, she's not doing the tricks yet where she could fall at any second. Whereas by the end, I was, right? There's 10 tricks in a routine. There was 9 out of 10 I could probably fall on. How did you, cope with having to do that as the coach? And then I can't imagine how I am as the mother in the stands. Like,
Well, it was difficult. When you were on balance beam, throughout your gymnastic career, I think I don't have to hide this from you anymore, is I never watched one of your beam routines. I would know whether you were on beam or not by the sound of the audience. If there was, I knew you fell, and if there was silence, I knew you hit. But that was the only event I couldn't watch, and I can't tell you why. I don't know why. I could watch you on the other events, but when you went on balance beam, I would do this. And
you couldn't watch.
I couldn't watch, and it sort of became a joke. And then I trained myself with everybody else to keep my eyes on them because I felt ridiculous. So now that Jamie's in the gym, I'm really good. I can watch, and I could sort of. I know.
Yeah, you're just watching me suffer through it now. But I think about that now. Having to play the double role of it. I got lucky. I mean, lucky, but I worked incredibly hard for it, and then I managed to get the scholarship to UMass. So I had this NCAA experience, which was
that
very
was
different
enjoyable
level
for me.
Yeah.
Because I was the mother, not the coach.
Yes, it was different.
It was different. It was an honor to do all the routines.
Yes, we actually had the team. We took a van from UMass and came up prior to season, and you actually did the choreography for
your
the girls,
team, for the UMass girls team and women's team. And there I was able to be a mom. So I would love driving to all the different competitions because I could sit in the stand. And I trusted the coach you were with. I knew you were doing this because you loved it. There was no conflict.
And I think what I loved about it is that I was training with 12 other girls who were at the exact elite level as I was, whereas growing up, most of my competition was in Toronto. Like there's a much stronger gymnastics community in the city now. There's really good kids throughout the city. But when I was training, I was the only elite.
You and athletes from the Ottawa Gym Club. So, but there weren't 10 kids your age in the gym, and now we have that. Now, when you're a competitive athlete at Corona, you'll have 6, 7, 8 kids your age on your team. So there's a huge social development that's going on. I know most of Jamie's friends.
Oh, that's their family.
Are her gym friends.
They're best friends. It's different. As this is all happening, the club itself is growing and expanding. In 1990, you did the massive renovation.
We did a massive renovation in 1993, and then we did a massive renovation 10 years ago. And as ever evolving we are, we will probably do another one in the coming future, which will be the 4th huge stage of Corona's development.
Has it been the shift in there's a massive recreational side, and I think, and I explained to a lot of people tend to put their kids in gymnastics or in these fun classes to build a foundation for their body, for fundamentals for other sports. They're not putting their kids in to become gymnasts. They're putting their kids in to develop fully all aspects of physical movement so that they can then put them in. You find that's a lot of the interest.
Absolutely. We have 1,200 children who come once a week to do recreational gymnastics. And I think one of our strengths at Corona is that we made a huge investment in making sure that child who comes 1.5 hours, 2 hours a week gets the ultimate workout. So the coaches are very well trained, and they are overseeing, and every child has a turn, and every child is followed. We have records on all these young children that come once a week, but we know what class they belong to. So our commitment to the rec program is as great as it is to the competitive kids.
Plus, so sometimes there's a coach that spots a kid that goes, this kid's...
And that's right.
This kid's got what it takes,
Right. So the eye is out for that unique child. But really, 99% of the population doesn't like being upside down. And yet the sport is a great sport for kids because it teaches balance and flexibility and learning to take your, standing in line. There's no kicking. There's no yelling. It's discipline. It's quiet discipline.
Quiet discipline in a very loud, crazy gym. But that's just what makes the environment.
You know what I mean.
Yeah, I know.
No kicking,
I know
like
exactly.
in a soccer field. Hey, you. There's no screaming and yelling.
Yeah, and this has been an argument at our dinner table quite often, is the psychology or the understanding of putting your kid in an individual sport or putting your kid in a team sport. And this is probably usually my favorite discussion that we have in terms of building a child's overall well-being. Not well-being, but
balance.
how they're going to deal with things in life. And I feel that kids who have different backgrounds rely on different character traits to get through them if they have had an individual sport or a team sport background.
I have a good example because Jamie, who was about to go to a competition, said to me, "Do you think Mommy and Daddy, you would be disappointed if I didn't do well?" And we said, "No, we would feel whatever you want. If you were disappointed, we would feel bad. If you were pleased, we would be happy for you." And she said, "Yes, but when a gymnast does something, she's on her own and she can't blame anybody else. And like my sister, she's on a soccer team. She can just rely on somebody else." She said it as is. For a 10-year-old, she gets it. And really, that's what you have to look at in terms of a child. If the child does well relying on themselves, I don't think there's any worry that they do an individual sport. On the other hand, if a child is more timid, needs more social interaction as part of their sport development, then team sport is better suited to their personality. But these things show up early. And, if a child is in the gym and they're constantly chattering and they need a teammate along to get support or advice from, they're probably better off in a team sport. I don't think there's one direct answer.
No,
I know we have this
discussion all the time because there's
Tony.
Yeah, there's so many pros and cons to it. As this is happening, I want to get into kind of how the business of sport has changed, because I think even if you look in the city, the growth of clubs, of sports organizations, that there are, because the city itself has grown so much, there's a massive business side to what is happening. And so while you were once doing 90% coaching and at 10% on the business side, as you've aged and I do want to say, and I want to hit back on the physical toll that the coaching took on your body. We'll get to that in a bit. Just how you're shifting, as you probably should be retiring, you're not, because there's still this, there's still this
expansion. I still have a vision.
Yes,
not done
you're not
yet.
Done yet.
I know.
Even though all your friends are in Florida.
I'm not done yet. There's still something that I feel I haven't completed the journey. But the physical aspect of being a coach, we're standing on our feet 4 hours a night, sometimes 5, and you're physically lifting a gymnast.
And catching them.
So many coaches, just like athletes, develop chronic problems, shoulder problems, back problems, because we're catching. So I think the sport today requires a male in the gym. When I began my coaching career, there were no men involved. And sort of every decade, don't forget, I'm at it 45 years, every decade, you could see the physical changes because the tricks became bigger. You needed men to help the women spot.
Well, by the time I was 14, 15, there was a male coach, because there was no way I was trusting, as much as I could not trust you to catch me coming off of, a major trick. Or to throw, it was just a trusting that I wasn't going to injure myself having a male larger than me.
Felt,
yes.
Right, but we have pits and we have the foam, and the female coaches from day one, they have to be strong enough. That's just part of the way it is today, evolution. We know that for a female to be involved, they have to have the guts and the strength to be able to spot. But at the same time, if you're having a full-grown gymnast at 5'4", and they're doing big tricks, you do need to have the male around. But to sort of go back, that's the evolution. As we get older in coaching, we do less spotting because it's very hard. So what else is happening is a woman my age could have a 25-year-old male counterpart who doesn't understand the technique of gymnastics yet, but is strong and can help spot. So there are ways to help keep women coaches on their feet for a long time, as long as they have the physical support. But you asked me the question, I want to go back to how it changes, more business.
Yeah.
Well, sport has grown in Canada, which is great. In the early 70s, we weren't doing anything unless it was winter sport. Now kids are involved in soccer and t-ball, and there are just endless things. So when I started gymnastics, it was considered just sort of something you do in high school. It's not something you do in a private club. So as the club grew, you had to have a business sense. You basically were running a business that happened to be sport. And I had to learn along the way what it is to be an employer, what it is to how to hire, how to train, how to motivate, keep the child happy, the coach happy, and the parent happy. Some days I had really bad days.
Oh yeah, and it came home. But you've had, and I want to bring Penny into this, because usually in a company that has grown to this magnitude, there's a number of people. And Penny, who is a gymnast of yours,
she was my first gymnast.
Your first gymnast has been your right hand person,
through the 45
partner.
years. So she's 10 years younger, and she was a teenager when I met her, I became her coach, and when she finished university at Ottawa U, Corona has been her only employer. We have worked together for 45 years. And we are a great balance. Where I'm strong, she's weak, and where she's weak, I'm strong. And we found a fit. It was like a marriage.
Yeah.
It's like a marriage. We can have an argument and make up and just know this is my area and that's your area.
And I think what was also evident too is that you were both fit. You both kept up your own health. And a lot of people now ask me, you know, like I have a very athletic background. I was an athlete from a young age, but I lived in a household where you were also very active. Like we talked about, you know, kids doing other sports. We skied on Saturdays, and in the summers we biked from our house in Craig Henry downtown because we went along the parkway. You instilled a very health conscious, health-oriented, wellness-based environment to grow up in.
Our family holidays always were based around some activity. We either went skiing or we went to camp, we cycled, you're right. It was just innate in me, and it was very important for me to pass it on. And really, I was lucky, too, that both you and your brother had that same sort of genetic makeup towards it. It can happen in a family where the parents are extremely active, and they just have a child who's much more lethargic. And I think that's when the challenge is for parents to help that child find a balance, because we know the only way to age is to be physically fit. It becomes very hard when you're 70 years old and it's hard for you to get in and out of a car. If you're lucky enough to be healthy, then it's our obligation to keep our bodies fit and active.
And you're doing that. I mean, I maintain that still every day, but I am a better person having had the endorphins and needing the workout. I always tell people, I used to work out 4 hours a day. For me to get in 1 hour a day or 45 minutes is easy because it puts my mind, it sets my mindset in the right place, and I have the endorphins and my body keeps moving. You're still doing that. I mean,
Not
you're going
4 hours, yes.
Right, but Mom, I can hardly get a hold of you. You've got your Pilates class, you know, in the morning, and you've got
my speed walking, my Pilates, my cycling.
Yeah, and I think your bridge to keep your mindset, you know.
And work.
But, and you're still working, and you're still working with the athletes. But how, you know, when you talk to your friends now, they see that the movement that you've had your whole life has allowed you to have a much more active, you know, golden years.
Absolutely, and I highly recommend you go on this journey of doing this health and wellness podcasts and talking about what's important to you. Is if you love to read, take some time to learn how to love to walk. As I have to learn how to read and do something intellectual, I think we know so much about the science of the body, that if you keep your muscles and your tendons and your bones healthy, the length of your life, how you live out your life will be much more carefree.
And you feel, I mean, I know, you know, you talk about you hurt from the years of catching and being on your feet for all of those years. I mean, there is that, but you would rather be active through
and hurt a little bit.
Yes.
Than inactive. I have the same reaction as you do. The minute I have a workout, I just feel great. It changes my outlook on everything, and I have a greater appreciation. I know when I was skiing in Zermatt, and I looked at the Matterhorn, I just said, I am so lucky to be alive and to be able to have this experience at my age, to be on this beautiful mountain and be physical. It teaches me a real great appreciation for where I come from and where I am today.
I'm looking at my time because these seem to fly by. I want to end, because I'm going to have you back on, Mom. We'll talk about a whole bunch of other things. But the biggest impact that I think a coach can have is when athletes return. And you've had thousands of athletes, but you have hundreds of them over the years who have come back as athletes, come back and coached, who are now coming back with their children. You have athletes now who are coming back with their grandchildren.
I know.
And you have athletes who have gone on to excel and become world champions in other sports.
Yes.
Like, where for you at the end of the day do you say, I've built this massive business that is one of the largest in the country, and I have hundreds and thousands of lives who think that I've made an impact on who they've become as a person.
I would say that it's who they have become as a person. I think deep down inside, that's where I started off. As a young girl that said I was going to be a gymnastic coach, it wasn't about how big the business would be. It was that I made an impact on the life of a child that remembers their childhood, learned something from me, carried it throughout their life. And when I have an adult that comes back and says, you coached me, and I remember this, and this changed something for me, that's when I have, I feel a great gratitude. And it happened with Jamie. And it made my 45 years of coaching special because, last week I coached her. Mm-hmm. And which is, again...
Her coach was away.
Her coach was away, and
she
made it very clear that I am a grandmother in the gym. That is my job. She was never going to allow me to be the coach that I was to her mother. So she would say, you're my bubby.
Yeah.
You stay out of it. Just tell me you love me. And because her coach was away, I had to coach her for a week. And at the end, on Sunday night, when you guys were over for dinner, she snuggled up to me and she whispered in my ear, you really helped me. On one day, actually you helped me 2 days. Well, no, 3, 4, 5 days, the whole week that I was in. And she snuggled in and she said, you're really good, Bubby. Well, I wanted to cry. And then she said she made one other comment. She said, I wasn't ready for this a little while ago, but I'm growing up and I understand what you have to offer. I think we should end our conversation on that because I'm going to cry because it was like seeing my little granddaughter maturing into a young athlete who was introspective of what it is to be coached or take criticism, to appreciate what others have to offer. That was great.
Yeah, it was. It's been fun. I will leave it there because I think there's a lot more to hit on, and I think for other coaches also, this that they're listening, or you have parents who have their kids in a sport and want a certain understanding of what the coach is going through. I think it gives definitely a good perspective.
And I love you.
I love you too, Mom. Thanks for dinner. And that's it. That'll wrap up this edition of Living Your Life with Leanne Laing.